Hello, everyone, and welcome to Probing New Public Opinion Data for an Informed Response. This is the third in a series of Zoom forums where we at MassINC and the MassINC polling group examine COVID-19 public opinion research and explore potential new policies designed to address the impacts of COVID-19. Last time, we looked into data on how the crisis impacted K-12 students and their parents and got a lot of great questions from the viewers. So thank you to all who joined us then. And thank you to everyone joining now. Today, we look forward to an informative and engaging discussion with you all. So as you're listening, remember to please use the chat function for any questions you may have. They may be either answered in the chat by MassINC Polling Group Research Director Maeve Dugan, or they may be answered by our speakers during our question and answer portion at the end. Before we jump into the presentations, I first want to extend a huge thank you to the sponsors of this poll, the Barr Foundation, the Boston Foundation, and the Smith Family Foundation. Without your support, this poll would not have been possible. We thank you. The survey we are about to talk to today asked Massachusetts parents about their children's college plans and whether COVID had impacted those plans. And shortly, we will dive into the results of the poll in a presentation led by Steve Gazella, the president of the MassINC polling group. After Steve's presentation, we will give the stage to Ben Foreman, research director at MassINC, who will discuss some current and potential policies designed to combat the negative impacts the crisis has had on learning and future college plans. With that, I want to turn the floor over to MassINC polling group president, Steve Gazella. Steve, take it away for us.
Thank you very much, Juana, and thank you everybody for joining us today for this discussion. What I'm here to talk about today is a survey that we did of parents of 10th to 12th graders in Massachusetts. That was actually part of a survey, the same survey that we discussed last week. And I know that many of you were looking at the list of people who were here last week, who are here on this call, were also here last week. So you'll see that some of the data that we're going over is similar to what we you'll recognize it as being part of the survey that we discussed last week. So specifically, we talked, the data that we're talking about today, though, is from parents of 10th to 12th graders here in Massachusetts. For those who weren't here last week, the full survey was one of 1,502 10th to 12th grade parents. We also did it with oversamples of Black, Latino, and Asian parents, the idea being that we wanted to be able to look at the results of the full K-12 data in more detail than just a typical representative parent sample would allow. What that means for this survey, for what we're talking about today, is we're able to look also at Black, Latino, and Asian parents in a bit more detail than would otherwise be possible, even though the overall sample is somewhat smaller. The overall sample of 10th to 12th graders specifically. So the survey was conducted June 4th to the 19th. That becomes particularly important in this particular survey just because there's, as you all know, there's just been a huge amount of politics and political heat about reopening and college plans and different colleges announcing their plans, and even the president, of course, weighed in on reopening for the fall. We've also seen many more cases just in the last few weeks, unfortunately, which I think also it's reasonable to assume could potentially influence what people are thinking about for the fall. So when you're thinking about when particularly is this a snapshot of, that is the date range that we're looking at. The data is weighted to represent parents by race and ethnicity, also age, gender, education, and region. And the sponsors for the survey, as Juana mentioned at the beginning, we just want to offer a huge thank you to. It was the Barr Foundation, the Boston Foundation, and for this particular portion of the survey, we want to extend a special thank you to the Smith Family Foundation. So just a quick look at the main things that we found. Most people say that their child's college plans have not changed. The majority says that there hasn't been any change, but there's big demographic differences between who says their plans have changed and how exactly they say their plans have changed. specifically pertinent to last week's survey, you'll remember that there were different demographic groups who expressed more or less connection to what was happening at the school. So some parents were saying, you know, my kid is in an online classroom every single day. They're hearing from their teachers multiple times a week. They're doing one-on-one check-ins, getting personalized feedback. I'm getting supported, you know, just described a very close connection. While others were almost completely disconnected, or not connected, I should say. Their children were not able to participate in online classrooms for various reasons, and so forth. And the reason that it matters for this, what we're talking about today, is that it's a lot of the same groups. The groups that weren't able to really connect with and engage with their schools were the same groups that are now saying that their college plans have changed and that their children are more likely to delay entrance. So technology and language barriers are two of the big ones. That's again something that we saw affect the K-12 experience across ages and across demographic groups. And that's something which really has had a big, you'll see has a big impact on the degree to which plans have changed for college as well. In terms of, we also then just asked about concerns for attending college and found that the perennial biggest concern, affordability, is now tied with health and safety. And again, this was in June, and we've seen in limited surveys, not on this specific issue, but on limited surveys about reopening in general, that health and concerns have actually increased since early June. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as we look at those results. Overall, though, what we found, at least in this one, is that about the same percent say that their child is very likely to attend college in the next few years as have attended college in the past. It's almost identical, in fact, with 72% of parents of 10th to 12th graders saying that their children are very likely to attend in the next few years. The next few years, of course, is pertinent because even if we weren't experiencing potential delays like we are, just because, again, this is three years worth of students, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. But that's about equal to what DESE reports for college attendance in the most recent data on Massachusetts students. We've also seen that, at least in the most recent updates, which are now a couple weeks old, the percentage of students completing their FAFSA applications is also not decreased hugely. But again, that's something that I would keep an eye on as opinion continues to evolve. So overall, we found 76% of parents said that their children's college plans had not changed. 17% said that their children's plans had changed. 7% were unsure, which I think is also kind of an interesting number. But overall, it's about 1 in 4 who either say their children's plans have changed or they're unsure. There are big demographic differences, though, in the percents who say that their children's plans have changed. And what this big chart here on the right-hand side of this slide shows is the percent in each demographic group or each experience group who say that their children's college plans have changed. And just like we talked about technology limitations, just like we talked about language barriers last week, we see the same issues at the top here. So 37% of parents who said, we do not have enough internet in our home to perform the tasks that we need to do online, to do remote learning. 37% of those parents said that their children's college plans have changed. This was a question where, it's one of those things where perhaps in the past the home did have enough internet for what was required before, but now you've got one parent, maybe two parents trying to do their own remote work. You've got 1, 2, or 3 children trying to do, remote school, and now you do not have enough internet for what you have to do now. And that was a big thing that impacted remote learning, which we saw last week, and it's also a big thing which is impacting the likelihood of college plans changing. We also saw language barriers in the same category of things that were a barrier across the K-12 experience and was also a big barrier here. Not enough people without enough devices to complete online learning tasks. Residents of gateway cities, people who were furloughed and looking for work. We see Latino and Black residents up there. And then you can kind of just scan your way down the chart and see the very big differences in percents of those who say, this has really impacted my, my child's plans. My child's plans have changed in some way. So we also asked about how plans have changed, because certainly there were different things that you could say were going to happen. And one of them was just, are you going to delay entrance into college? And the next slide shows the percent who's, whoops, sorry, I got them a little bit out of order there. Then this slide shows the percent who say that they are planning to delay, again, by some of the same demographic groups. You can see, again, there's this very familiar set of things up there, you know, kind of the top 2 or 3 things. Not enough internet, not enough devices, language barriers, you know, are just a persistent feature throughout the quality of remote learning, and also a very clear feature here in terms of the likelihood that a parent said that they were going to delay college. So delaying wasn't the only thing we asked about, though. We also asked about some other things that were potentially more likely or less likely, and here's 3 of them. There's a couple more to come later. One was delaying, which we've talked about a little bit already, and we see about 1 in 4 parents say that their child is now more likely to delay entrance into college than they were before the pandemic started. We also see 22% saying that they're now more likely their child's more likely to attend college online. That's a bit of a wash, because we also see, you know, some saying less likely, and a similar kind of split on certificate and credential programs. The other interesting thing about these charts is that, you know, often these gray bars out to the right are just sort of, well, this is everybody else. You know, this is the people who didn't express an opinion on this. But in this case, the group who is neither more nor less likely is pretty interesting. And the demographics of that group is also quite interesting. Basically, what we'll see a little bit later is that it's a luxury to be able to say your plans haven't changed. That's a luxury. And the demographics of who actually said that are quite interesting. But before we get to that, I want to just look a little bit more at the tech barriers, because this, again, is something that's just come up over and over again in our assessment of and polling about remote learning, or polling about college attendance. If you have enough devices and if you have enough internet. And then the third thing we asked about is, do you use email regularly? And what this slide shows is that there are big differences between income groups as to whether or not you don't have enough devices, don't have good enough internet, and don't use email. Kind of the 3 elements of being connected from a technology standpoint to the online and remote learning experience. There were major inequities by income. And then we also looked at this just in terms of, okay, well, who is facing sort of a tech burden? If you don't have these things, if you're missing 2 of the 3, then then this slide is from last week. This is all K-12 parents. Then you would be, we use the term tech burdened. And you can see that this is something where there were quite considerable inequities by race and ethnicity, with 18% of white residents under 75,000, 25% of Black residents, and so forth. So the percents here that you see in the white, Black, Latino, and Asian bars are only residents under $75,000 who would be classified as tech burdened. So then looking back at some of the other things we asked about in terms of what are you now more likely, or what are you now less likely to say that your child might do, we see quite a significant growth in the percent who say that their child is more likely to both attend a 4-year college and to attend a public college, by about a 3-to-1 ratio in each case. And then the percent who said attend a 2-year college has actually gone down a little, or it tilts toward the less likely side. I think there's a couple possible explanations for this, and I'm interested to hear if any viewers of this have other thoughts or comments at the end. One that we have been discussing is that some of it's aspirational. Some of it is is that this is something that people aspire for their child to do. Another one is that, you know, we often see during difficult economic times that people take that this is now a time when college is more necessary than, and jobs are less plentiful than might be true in an up economy. So that was another potential reason we saw for it. But I think that the most interesting thing when you think about this and the previous charts is that there are kind of the top three things are people are going to attend a 4-year. More people say that they would attend a 4-year, attend a public, or just delay entry into college. But we do need then to talk a little bit about the percent who said no change, nothing has changed. And those are the percents that you see appearing on this this chart with different shades of blue on it. And what the percents are is the percent of each group who said, my child is neither more likely nor less likely to do each one of the things listed in the left-hand column. So just to give you a sense of what that means, 50% overall said neither more nor less likely to attend a 4-year college. But then when you kind of scan across, you see that there are big differences in the degree to which parents were able to say, nothing's changed for me. My plans have not changed. You can see that white parents were more likely to say that. Parents with college degrees, parents with more income, parents outside gateway cities. Whereas in each one of these cases, parents in the other groups were less likely to be able to say that my plans have not changed in either direction. So of course, in some cases, plans will have changed to make you more likely or less likely to do something. But the kind of ability to just bowl your way through all the difficulties that are happening right now and just say, my child's going to do exactly what they were going to do before, is I think you can see in this is certainly a privilege, we'll put it that way. This is the same chart, just looking again at the devices and language barriers. And you can see that, again, having enough devices and not encountering language barriers were also very closely related to the ability to say that your plans have not changed, that your child is going to do what they were planning to do before. You can see just looking between the devices versus not enough devices, that if you were well connected in terms of technology, you were more likely to be able to say your plans haven't changed. So then the couple other questions that we asked about were what the specific concerns were about attending college in the fall in the next few years. And affordability is one I think that if you are on this call, you're very familiar with. We've all spent years and decades talking about this problem and the crisis that it's become. But what's interesting is that now we see health and safety right up there at the top as well, very close to affordability in terms of the concern level about it. So the dark red portion of the bar is the percent who said that they feel a great deal of concern about the issue. The lighter part is the percent who say that they feel a fair amount of concern about it. I should say that, you know, these are all pretty high concern levels for things that we wouldn't have necessarily had to think about other than affordability in the past, you know, doubts whether campuses will be open, reduced preparation time, and so forth. But again, just the top two, I think, are also a very interesting feature of this chart. We then broke it out by white versus non-white parents, broke out the concern level. The bars here are the percent who said that each one of these issues concerns them a great deal about the idea of their child attending college in the fall. And you can see that in each case, there's at least a nominal difference, and in some cases a reasonably sizable difference in terms of the concern between white and non-white parents. The biggest difference is reduced preparation time for my child due to school closures. But again, there's at least a directional consistency when you're looking at all of them, health and safety, reduced preparation time, and so forth. So that is a very quick tour through some of the highlights of the data. I am now going to step aside and turn it over to my very good friend and colleague, Ben Foreman, who's going to walk through some other data on college affordability and other issues.
Ben, you're on mute.
Thanks, Juan. Can you see my screen okay here now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I want to start, just by, framing Steve's data that show there are definitely students in low-income families and students in families of color that are thinking about postponing or delaying college. And we know that momentum is really critical to college completion. And this is not new, whether it's a car that broke down or a landlord who wants to raise the rent or a family member that gets sick. Low-income students are more likely to hit those bumps in the road that throw them off and slow their momentum down and make it less likely to complete a college degree. So I think, there's an interesting piece by Lawrence Wright in the New Yorker last week about how a pandemic opens our eyes and can bring a renaissance as we think about what we need to fix. And clearly one of the things we need to fix in our Commonwealth is access to higher education and completion. I think for a long time, we've been a state that's prided ourselves on the elite private institutions in our community, but those are not the schools that serve the majority of our students, and we've neglected public higher education. At the same time, we've built a knowledge economy, and if you don't have on-ramps to that knowledge economy, you don't have equal opportunity in Massachusetts. And these data, my first chart, show that in reality, economic mobility does not exist for the average student in Massachusetts. For the first time, thanks to John Papay and his group at Brown University, we're able to examine the trajectory of Massachusetts students all the way through high school, through post-secondary studies if they go either to private or public schools, and then into the labor market to see what their earnings are. And this shows us that students who are raised in low-income families are getting about a third less at age 32. So these were 2003 MCAS takers who are now 32 years old, and this was their earnings in 2019. $35,000, close to $36,000 for students from low-income families versus about $50,000 for students from high-income families. You may have seen these data reported in the Globe a couple of weeks ago. I think it's really important that all our conversations really are centered around what they tell us. And in fact, we know these gaps are probably much worse because these are students who are in the labor market. People who aren't participating in the labor market for whatever reason, maybe they're incarcerated, maybe they have a health issue, they're much more likely to have come from low-income families. So if we factored that in, these bars, the disparities between them would be far greater. But the good news is we know that from these data, what they're able to tell us as we follow students through is that education does its job. It closes the gaps in earnings. And so if you look at a student from a non-low-income family versus a low-income family in Massachusetts, they're earning about the same amount. You compare them here based on what they earned, what their score was, what percentile they fell in the MCAS when they took it in 2003. That sort of gives us a picture of what their academic ability and preparation for. And then we look at the ones who completed a four-year college degree all across that spectrum, their low-income students versus their higher-income peers. And you see there's a very small gap. It's not that 30, 40% that was on the previous slide. It's more like 10% or less. And I don't want to minimize that because that is real and something we need to address, but education is doing its job. I think if you look at John's report and you unpack this, you can see that it's maybe a mixture of social network effects, but largely the gap that remains is related to discrimination in the labor market. I think you can see that because it's much larger for Black students than it is for Hispanic Latino students. And actually really interesting, students who were low English language learner, immigrant students who wouldn't have that natural social network are earning more than native students. So clearly, I think, as we saw from the study that came out on discrimination in housing markets, there's discrimination in labor markets. But the good news here is that education is doing its job and lifting all boats when we're able to provide students with the opportunities they need to complete higher education. Unfortunately, though, And these are another set of data that we all need to be very aware of. The gaps have been growing in college and completion rates. You know, if you look at the 2007 cohort of students, so students who should have graduated high school and gone on to college in 2007 versus the 2011 cohort, 6 years out, that's the most recent data we have. You can see that, you know, white students are about twice as likely as Black and Hispanic students in Massachusetts to complete a college degree, either a 2 or 4 year degree. And that, you know, has the gap between white students and Black and Hispanic students has grown over the last few years. So we aren't making the gains that we need to be making to solve this problem. This chart is kind of complicated, but I just want to kind of pick it apart because it's really important to understand what are the trajectories of students. So this looks at that most recent class of 2011 and where did they go? So the bottom 2 bars, the green and the blue, are the ones who went directly to college. The next fall they were enrolled in college. And you can see that for white students, it's almost 70% of students are either enrolled in a 4-year institution or a 2-year institution the following fall, 80% of Asian students. And for Black students, it's a little over half, and Hispanic students is about 40% who are going directly to either a 2 or 4-year institution. Black and Hispanic students obviously are much more likely to go to a 2-year community college than white and Asian students. The question though is what happens to those large numbers who haven't completed high school or who did complete high school but didn't go immediately to college? And the answer is a large number of them will end up in a 2-year institution, in a community college at some point. You know, they'll have had some disruptions, they've lost some momentum, so they'll need even more support completing those rigorous college courses and getting on a trajectory to completion. And we so under-resource those 2-year colleges that are serving our students of color that they really have trouble making it. You know, especially when they're working. This just gives you a picture of 2-year college students versus 4-year college students at public institutions, mind you. So these are all public students in Massachusetts. And those who are at community colleges are much more likely, or much less likely to be attending full-time. So they're working a lot of hours and they're trying to take college courses at the same time. And it's very difficult to shoulder all of that. And these are the people who are serving us in the pandemic. I think that, you know, lots of stories and reports have brought that to our attention, that people who are driving buses or working in grocery stores or working as medical assistants, they're serving us, putting themselves at risk, but they're also trying to go to school at night. And this is what happens to them. Going back to John Pape's research from Brown, when we look at students' same academic preparation, academic ability, based on their MCAS scores, at any point in the distribution, they're about 20 percentage points less likely to earn a 4-year degree. And you can see even at the tail end of this distribution, the 99th percentile MCAS score earners, the most talented and gifted students, are still dramatically less likely, if they come from low-income families, to complete a college degree. So, you know, I think as we think about what the future looks like post-pandemic, what do we need to be doing to providing these students with the supports and giving them a much better chance to enjoy the economic mobility that a post-secondary degree affords in the Massachusetts economy. I want to talk now about early college as a model because it's something we've looked at a lot going back to 2013. I think it first came to our attention because we were looking at strategies specifically for gateway cities that leverage their assets as urban communities. One of those assets that almost all of them have is a community college or a state college right in their community that has strong relationships with their K-12 districts. So an early college program is one where high school students have structured opportunities to take college classes and earn both high school and college credit at the same time. There's lots of advising and support wrapped around them as they take on that more rigorous coursework, so they're able to get through it. And also so that they make informed choices about what is a career pathway, what is the educational requirements of that career pathway, how do I go about tackling that one course at a time. that was something in 2013 we thought would appeal to both low-income students, but also middle-class families in Massachusetts and make gateway cities more attractive and socioeconomic diverse communities. But as the research has come out, we clearly see that this program, this approach has very strong pronounced benefits in terms of increasing college completion for low-income students and underserved students, not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country. I think it's really the only intervention for college completion that's been evaluated by 2 different random controlled trials. So we have sort of gold standard evidence that it boosts college completion. And we have some new data just from Massachusetts that shows that we are on track to accomplish what those national random controlled trials have showed us is possible. And we're doing this at scale. That's the most important thing. This is not a one-off program that's serving a dozen students here and a dozen students there. Over the last 3 years, we've tripled in enrollment in the state's designated early college programs. And if you can look at the middle bar here, not only we increased the enrollment in these programs, but the number of credits that students are participating in them are earning is growing dramatically. So we're bringing new students in, and the students who are existing programs are taking more college courses and earning more college credits by the time they graduate, which gives them a very good, strong start toward the degree and increases the likelihood that they'll complete. You know, one of the things it does in particular is save their families a lot of money, because in an early college program, you earn those credits for free. You don't pay tuition or fees, which saves you your federal Pell Grant for down the road, and allows you to, to continue your undergraduate education further than you may have otherwise based on your family's needs. I think obviously it's really important when we have an intervention like this to make sure that it's reaching the students that it was designed to serve. Again, it can bring benefits to all sorts of families in Massachusetts, but the strategy is to close the gaps. Low-income students, and particularly students of color who've been underserved by public higher education in Massachusetts for a long time. And if you look at this chart, over half of the students in early college programs are Hispanic, a quarter of them are Black. And this just compares them to the populations of their high schools. And so you can see, they're actually more likely to be Hispanic than the students in the high school they attend, more likely to be Black than the students in the high school they attend, and obviously dramatically more likely than the average student in Massachusetts to be students of color. One of the things I think is really important to see is that these students in these classes, when you compare them to other students in Massachusetts who have the same demographic attributes, who have the same MCAS scores, so they're a pure statistical comparison group, they're taking much more rigorous courses. They're dramatically more likely to complete Mass Core, which is the state's recommended curriculum for students who intend to go on to college. It requires 4 years of math, 3 years of lab sciences, and 2 years of foreign language. So the opportunity to earn college credit, to have a chance a better chance to complete college, is obviously inspiring students to do more, to work harder, to strive, and take advantage of this opportunity, which is really important to see. We're not lowering the bar for these students by any means based on these data. We're actually asking them to do more challenging work while they're high school students. The other thing that I think is really compelling to see is when you look at FAFSA completion, that same statistical comparison group, when we look at kind of equivalent students, whether they're in early college or not, we're seeing the students who are in early college were much more likely this spring during a challenging time to get their FAFSAs completed. So that they were clearly supported and continued to plan for college throughout the pandemic. It wasn't the same sort of road bump as it was for students who didn't have the advantage of being enrolled in an early college. And most importantly, we're seeing from the first cohort of students who went on to college last fall that they were 20 percentage points more likely to enroll in college than students who weren't in early college. That is an order of magnitude increase that's rare to see in any intervention, but it's right on par with what we would expect to see based on the random controlled trials of early college, which make it such a compelling college completion model. And this is early days. I think that's one of the most exciting things for us is we would expect these new programs that are scaling up and serving many more students very quickly to actually do better as they get a handle for the very difficult work of sending students to high school and college at the same time and improve over time if we resource them appropriately. I think one of the big concerns is that we tend to implement proven models, but don't adhere to all of the attributes of that model because we don't provide them the money and we underfund them and then they underperform. But I think the promising thing about early college is we are tracking these students. We are collecting data in a way that we haven't previously for programs like this, and so we'll be able to see whether our effort and investments are working. One thing that people are concerned about is, are we taking students, putting them in early colleges that are primarily programs that are run in partnership with two-year colleges and making it more likely than that they would attend a two-year college rather than a four-year college? And the evidence here from looking at this first cohort of students is clearly we are increasing attendance at two-year colleges. We're doubling it essentially compared to the comparison group, but that's not coming out of the 4 years. In fact, we're increasing enrollments in 4 years by about 4 percentage points. So I think that really tells you that those students who are doubling their enrollment in community colleges right off the bat, directly out of high school, are students who are unlikely to have gone or were likely to have gone with a delay that would have interrupted their momentum and made it much more likely for them to eventually complete. So, again, we only have one cohort of student who's enrolled and we have another cohort of students who's going this fall. We need to see much more data in terms of completion, in terms of what their earnings are when they reach the labor market. We have the system set up now to track that and to follow that. And I think that that is something, if we really want dramatic change as a community, we need to be focused on. But I think this is very much something the Department of Higher Education, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education have worked on jointly in a coordinated way and as a core component of an equity agenda, recognizing that we can no longer just accept these gaps, that we need to do something dramatic to change them. So I'll stop there, Juana, and let you pick up with the question.
No, thank you so much, Ben, and thank you, Steve, for your presentations. I want to take this moment to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please use the chat function in our Zoom call, and we'll be sure to get to these questions by the end of our session. To get our question and answer session started, I would love to start it. Ben, you stated in your data and you demonstrated in your presentation that students of color, Black and Latino students, are much less likely to move on to four-year colleges. We know, and there's an estimation that 40% of Massachusetts high school students by the end of the decade will be students of color. Clearly, early college is an important tool in terms of what we should be doing to ensure that we're giving students an opportunity to complete post-secondary education. But what other policy considerations should we be taking into account in light of the fact that we've seen year after year disinvestment by our state in higher ed? Are there other things that we should include in this equation to ensure that we're really giving our prospective student population all the tools they need to really enter the workforce and the economy successfully?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, we could spend a lot of time on that one. I shared and spent so much time on early college, one, because we have the data there. Mm-hmm. We don't have that data for all that much else. And in fact, those data are very new. They were just presented to the joint early college board that oversees the initiative between higher ed and DESE last month. So I think it's important that they get out there and people understand that the initiative is having the impact that was promised. But I think it's also important for us to take note of, because it demonstrates that interventions can dramatically improve outcomes. One thing we've seen, there's an initiative out of New York City that's been scaled elsewhere in the US that tries to get community college students to attend full-time rather than part-time, providing them with all sorts of financial incentives and extra supports if they can find a way to become full-time students rather than students who are working and trying to do their academic studies at the same time. I think that's the kind of thinking we need. I think the reason why our low-income students are doubly burdened is because they didn't get the education they deserved often in K through 12, and then we asked them to take on challenging college education while they have to work a lot at the same time. in a state with very high costs. We have some of the highest tuition and fees, some of the lowest financial aid. People are trying to pay rent, to pay for tea passes that, as we've talked about, can be hundreds of dollars a month. And it just doesn't work. And so we've got to really think about how do we change our financial aid so that it's modern and it meets the realities of families in our Commonwealth today. And how do we really think about providing housing and other opportunities that students need to be able to be full-time students and get the significant skills that are required to pursue a career in the economy that we have built for Massachusetts.
All important points, Ben. I could not agree more with you. On that, one final question from me, and then we're going to get to all of the questions that our audience have shared through our chat. Clearly, the data demonstrated, Steve, that affordability continues to be top of mind, right? Can I afford to go to college? And those with language barriers, those with technical difficulties, our data showed really had concerns and were the ones thinking about changing their plans. In your data, Ben, you demonstrated that there would be huge savings for families, for students who were enrolled in early college. But I also know that there are huge savings for our state. Could you talk a little bit about, what does the investment take for our state to continue to expand and invest in early college, and why it's a worthy investment?
Yeah, I mean, one, we have strong evidence that shows return on investment from early college. It's about a 12-to-1 return. Much of that, about 9 of those $12 go to the state or local governments in the form of higher earnings and higher revenues. And then some of the return goes to the family, of course, or the student who's earning more over their lifetime. So I think thinking about that as a case for investing in this at a time when our resources are more constrained as ever is really important. The other thing I think it's really important for us to consider is this is not a high cost intervention. We're talking about a couple of $1,000s per student to dramatically increase the likelihood that they earn a credential that's going to make them much more productive in our economy. At that point, we've already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the educations of these students. To spend just a little bit more to get them to be so much more effective in our economy, I think, is a really worthy proposition for taxpayers. And I think it's all the more imperative considering the racial wealth gaps that we can no longer continue to ignore.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's not just about giving these students access, right, to the economy. It's that our economy demands it. Like, I think you started with this point at the beginning of your presentation about we've built a knowledge-based economy in the state. That's what we rely on. And if we're not producing the students that can sustain that economy, then we're really putting our economy at risk. So I think that's a kind of different narrative around it. Steve, we have a question for you. At the top of the call, you highlighted that this poll was taken in June. Can you talk more about some of the factors, news, and political narratives that may have popped up since the poll was taken?
Yeah, and I think there's more to come on that too. I mean, we can look, even this, this call is a snapshot in time in a certain way. We've got the poll, which was done in June. We've got all the stuff that's happened since then. And then we've got a whole bunch more stuff that's going to happen throughout July and August. So I saw, for instance, someone else in the chat mentioned the fact that a lot of colleges and even a lot of K-12 institutions are just now either determining their plans or just now putting out their plans. All of that, of course, too, will have an impact. So what your individual school district's planning to do will have a major impact for K-12. We're starting to see colleges and universities roll out their plans for what the fall will look like, which obviously will impact parents' planning as well. And then there's also just the political, circus that we have going on right now, where everything around COVID, in addition to the public health crisis, is also creating just a massive amount of political heat and noise. So we're as political leaders on both sides weigh in, I think that'll also have impacts on how people feel about the degree to which, sending their children to college in the fall is safe. And then, of course, there's just the raw data of what infections look like for the next month. Right now, the United States is is on, I think, a crisis track when it comes to the direction of cases, which will also impact what's even possible by the time August and September roll around. You think about if things don't turn around, the idea of sending your child to Arizona or Florida or Texas or Oklahoma or somewhere, where cases are literally moving in a vertical direction, by the time September happens will be, a different prospect than it was in June, before the most recent kind of crisis began. So I think there's a lot of things that could have begun to nudge opinion already. And I think that it's very possible, if not certain, that will continue to happen, both in July and August.
Thank you, Steve. Ben, the next couple of questions are for you, and they regard the initial first slide of your presentation. Can you go back to that slide and tell us a little bit more about it? I'll ask you the first question in regards to that slide from Jonathan Cohen. As a parent of a high schooler and a college student, it is difficult to make decisions when the respective schools of choice have not declared their plans. How do you think results would or will be different when all schools have officially committed to their plans?
I think that one might have been for my stuff.
Yeah, I think so, Steve.
Yeah, but I think that I discussed that a little bit, and I think that it's very likely that there will be that impact.
Thank you, Steve. This question is from Leanne Scales. Are we tracking how many early college students complete community college associate degrees by the time they graduate high school, and the impact on four-year college going rate?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Leanne. I think you might know the answer better than I on that. So we know that, I think from your program, Mount Wachusett, you can put it in the chat, but what was it, 40 students that graduate high school with an associate degrees, and there were some from other institutions as well. I don't have a total. It's something we should look at, because as I noted, we haven't followed the cohort beyond 1 year in higher education, but some did finish high school with enough credits to earn associate's degrees, and some probably earn them pretty quickly with the number of credits that they're starting out with. We will definitely be tracking and soon reporting on kind of full results, 1 year out, 2 year out, 3 year out, 4 years out. And so stay tuned on that. I'm glad you pointed out that many do finish high school with their associate's degrees through early college programs. And I just think also to answer that and Manisha's question right below it at the same time, we are working on a study that looks at these same data following students from high school through post-secondary into the labor market, with a focus on community college students. So not just early college students, but all students whose trajectory takes them through a Massachusetts community college, and seeing how they do in the labor market based on their academic preparation, their family income, their race and ethnicity, and also by what they choose to study. Well, what's their field of study, and then what industry and occupation do they enter. So we'll have more on that in the fall, we hope. And to Manisha's question, the Brown Group, that includes John Papay, he's also working with Dick Murnane at the Harvard School of Education. Two great economists have merged these longitudinal data following students through the labor market, through education into the labor market, with criminal justice records. Or if they haven't done it, they're in the process of doing it. So fairly soon we'll have data to give us a much better indication of how programs help prevent incarceration or reduce recidivism. And you mentioned prison education. We've looked at that a lot. It's one of the surest ways to reduce recidivism. It was one of the biggest mistakes made in the tough on crime era, to sort of take all prison education out. But I think where we're hoping to go today is really to think about young adults who are in prisons and make sure that that's a very much different experience than what is offered today, which is basically a cell and no support. Make it more developmentally appropriate and much more focused on rehabilitation, because we know that those youth have long lives to live, and if we provide them with the right sets of supports, they could be much more productive members of the community. And again, these data will help us inform our approaches there.
Yeah, and there's a lot more work that could be done on that side of ensuring that as a state, our state budget is really investing and giving youth and people who've been incarcerated access to real integration, access to real economic mobility, right? The purpose is that we don't see you come back to our prison systems.
Yeah.
An additional question, and this one's for Steve, from Michelle Pierce. The number of students who are tech burdened is alarming. Do we know how schools and colleges are working to assist these students? It makes me concerned for both our early college and regular students at Salem State, where most instruction will be online this fall.
That's a great question, and I think it has particular pertinence given what what the fall could look like. If we do encounter some sort of hybrid model with some in classroom instruction happening and some happening remotely, then these issues are just as important in the coming school year as they were in the past school year for K-12 students. So absolutely true that the numbers are alarming, particularly for specific demographic groups, and it's not going away as an issue this coming year. Assuming that we're not everything's not solved the next month. It seems like this is going to be something that we're all talking about again. As we move into next school year. This is something that I hope to be able to continue to track, to see how parents are adjusting to the new school year and what the realities of attending school in the coming school year also look like for parents. But at the moment, definitely true that not having enough devices, not having enough internet and so forth did present problems and are likely to continue to do so.
Thank you, Steve. Another question from Julie Ramos Gagliardi. What are your thoughts on school choice and the impact it could have on the numbers reflected in the study?
I assume that one's for Ben.
Yeah, I don't think that factors in here so much, other than if we're talking about students choicing into schools that offer early college programs. Right now, I think we're at about 35 high schools that offer early college programs. So clearly there are many students in schools that don't have the opportunity to participate. And that's why the ability to scale this program is so important. We've seen in states like Texas and North Carolina that it's possible to make sure that it's spread across the state, and thousands of students or tens of thousands of students have opportunities for early college. And that's where those random controlled trials come from. That's where they're showing that even at that kind of scale, it's still having the same kind of impact. So I think our priority, rather than focusing on choice and getting people to a few places where it's offered, is to bring it to scale so it's ubiquitous.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, we're getting some questions about the slide you currently have up. Are the graph labels by any chance flipped? Can you clarify that for us?
Oh yeah, sorry, Juana. I added this one at the last minute just because I thought it was important to provide a picture of the disparity, but I guess that was a mistake since I'm giving a backward picture of it. Thanks for pointing that, whoever got that.
Great, thank you so much, Ben, for clarifying that. I think those are all the questions we have for today. So we want to, again, thank everyone for their time this afternoon. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Steve, for your thoughtful presentations. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for submitting your thoughtful questions. If you enjoyed this session, please stay tuned for upcoming forums in our series, Probing New Public Opinion Data for an Informed Response. We'll be back in your inbox soon with details on that. Until then, thank you all for tuning in and be well.